You know, the manufacturer of this drug, Johnson & Johnson,
Yes.
what would you like to say to them?
Take that drug off the market.
Through mass production methods, America is continually increasing its output of penicillin, the new drug that effects almost miraculous cures. The liquid medium in these bottles will grow the mold that forms penicillin. First, however, the liquid is purified by sterilization in great ovens. Turned into a powder, it is ready for use. The medium is carefully inoculated with the seeds of the penicillin mold.
Listen to your doctor.
Ask your doctor about Plavix today.
Ask your doctor about adding Seroquel XR today.
Ask your doctor about Nasonex.
Ask your doctor about Yasmin.
Talk to your doctor about Zoloft.
Talk to your doctor about your risk.
Ask your doctor.
Ask your doctor.
Talk to your doctor.
Talk to your doctor.
Ask your doctor.
Talk to your doctor.
Just talk to your doctor.
I hate to say this. I was a believer. And you can't believe when you dig into this research literature, and if you're a believer in science like I am, you can't believe the fraud that has been perpetrated on the American public. And it has been a fraud.
What I found when I was investigating issues to do with both personality disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder was that there was a fundamental lack of scientific credibility. The materials generated were largely anecdotal.
I wrote stories about how psychiatric disorders are caused by chemical imbalances. I can remember writing a story about there's depression screening day. Isn't that a good thing? Go get screened. So I was a believer in a story of psychiatry as a story of progress. We were learning about the brain, we were learning about the biological underpinnings of these disorders, and we had drugs that fixed that biological problem. That's what I believed as a science writer. So I was stunned. When you actually go to the research, it's not there.
Unfortunately, we have people who have swung that far over to the medical model, biological disease model, disease of the brain, that we're going to correct with this drug, just like the antibiotic cures you of pneumonia.
And I wasn't sure that he could diagnose me with all these, problems in 15 minutes. So I kind of feel that he handled it a bit like haphazardly, thinking, I complained to him about some of the things like not being able to sleep, and I think in his mindset, for every problem there's a pill, so you have a problem with sleeping, well, here's an Ambien. You have a problem getting up in the morning, here's some Adderall. So I think instead of working with other ways in which to deal with issues, I think today in American culture, it's very easy just to think, take this pill and that will solve your problem.
We do have this explosion of use of psychiatric drugs in children, no question about it. It's been well documented, particularly in the past, say, 10, 12 years. So the question is why?
Why do we have 10 million kids taking drugs because someone has labeled them defective?
Well, you can go back to 1990s, early 1990s, and the pharmaceutical companies were holding meetings.
Everything is incentivized to label children as ill.
And they were saying we need to expand our market into kids. They're an untapped market. That's what happened. There was no explosion of kids misbehaving more than, in past times or some sort of disease that was loose. It's a commercial enterprise. They identified the kids as a market in the same way that Coke might identify them as a market for soft drinks, and they've been very successful, incredibly successful.
And I came to America and I realized all these kids had their Adderall, had all these drugs, and I thought that a lot of them have an advantage over you. So I guess I tried to make it a level playing field, thinking I have the person that's taking Adderall to stay up and to work hard, I need that to compete with the the other kids and the other students. I need to have that same thing. And then I went to go see a psychiatrist, and it started off on a very small dose of just one drug, and it just kind of built up. And like before I knew it, I was on 7 different medications.
In 1998, the National Institutes of Health sponsored a 3-day ADHD conference and invited experts from around the world to participate.
I would now like to open the forum to questions from the press.
Joe Palca with National Public Radio. It sounds a little bit like you're saying that the definition is a little like the Supreme Court's definition of pornography, which is you know it when you see it.
No,
I'm concerned.
We're going to disagree, and okay. I would like any member of the panel to describe a typical ADHD in terms of symptomatology. Mark, would you like to? Since you see them in your practice.
I think the panel has been frank, and the difficulties here are immense in terms of these. It is hard. It's very hard to know how to answer this question. These kids, in my experience, when you see these kids, they are, several standard deviations different in terms of they cannot sit still, they cannot attend, they cannot, even when they are as if driven by a motive. There are some good clinical descriptions of these kids. I think
as pediatrician Mark Vonnegut struggles desperately to describe the symptoms of an ADHD child, it's fair to note that he must have diagnosed and treated hundreds of children for ADHD prior to this conference.
I think the part of the problem is the profession keeps changing the diagnosis. We have DSM-4, the latest thing, but we have no guarantee that DSM-5 won't give us yet another diagnosis. But certainly, I think we have the feeling, again, that's not very satisfying, and I'm sure somebody else on this panel should have and could have done a better job than me with this question, so I'll stop talking now.
To call normal children diseased, abnormal, chemically imbalanced, to make patients out of them for profit. This is not only anti-scientific, it is contrary to our Hippocratic oath. It is immoral, and it should be exposed and stopped.
What you find, in fact, is that the drugs cause chemical imbalances because they perturb normal systems, they block normal function of, say, dopamine and serotonin, and the brain actually tries to compensate for that. It was exactly reverse what I had written about and been told.
It's quite ironic, actually, because the only imbalances that we know of in the brains of people called mental patients are the ones inflicted on them by the psychiatric drugs. How ironic. We make a false claim that they have biochemical imbalances, and then we give them biochemical imbalances. What are we doing to our child when we give them Seroquel, Risperdal, Zyprexa, Malaril, or any one of these other drugs? These drugs impair the brain specifically by blocking the transmission to the frontal lobes of the brain. That's what makes us love and hate. It makes us prejudiced and generous. It makes us think abstractly. It gives us judgment. It's the human being. When you give one of those drugs, we reduce the personhood with these drugs even more profoundly than with the stimulant drugs. We disable their brains. It's a chemical lobotomy, and that's not a metaphor. That's a fact.
I was diagnosed with depression, and I was prescribed a drug called Seroquel, which is made by AstraZeneca. And I was prescribed it at a small dose, and then my dose was increased and increased. And I realized that I began to think it was turning me into a bit of a zombie, and I wanted to get off it. And I just stopped taking the medication one day, and 2 days later I was going through like terrible withdrawals, like having cold sweats. And it took me the better part of 6 months to slowly taper off that medication and come off it. And I was never informed that by taking this medication, you are going to be dependent on it. I felt like an addict to it. Like I would go to a friend's house and realize, oh, I can't spend the night because I haven't taken my medication. So you become a bit of a slave to not only the medication, but the pharmaceutical company and the psychiatrist himself.
Some patients that come in and they're getting meds that are for psychiatric treatment, and the doctor will just keep adding things on, and each time I see them, they don't seem to be getting better. They just seem to be more confused or less coherent. And I think to myself, well, when I first met them, they were kind of peppy and excitable, and now each time that I see them, they just seem to be more run down and zombie-like, and I sometimes don't think that that's actually, their life isn't any better.
911, where's your emergency? There's been a shot at Westside High School, middle school. Been what? There's been a shot at Westside Middle School. Okay. We need an ambulance as soon as possible. Okay. Do you know who done the shooting? No, we do not.
8 out of the 13 school shooters around the country, 8 of them were taking prescription psychotropic drugs.
Oh, God. Stay in the line of things. Oh, God. He's right outside of here. He's outside? He's outside of here. I am on the floor. Okay.
What happened?
We've had a shooter at the school.
You gotta be kidding me.
No, I'm not, sir.
The Germans had been worried about suicide and violence, particularly suicide, on Prozac. So they asked Eli Lilly to review its clinical studies. Studies created by the company, everything set up to make the drug look good and not set up to find adverse effects. And what have they found? In their in-house study, they found between a 6 to 12 times increase in rate of suicide attempts on Prozac compared to placebo. So what'd they do? They never reported it.
The biggest scandal that's been involved with SSRI production is that all manufacturers who have a major SSRI on the market were well aware before the drugs were licensed for use that they had serious side effects, and all of them, to my knowledge, and I have some in-depth knowledge of this, took steps to hide that information prior to drugs being licensed, indicating suicide ideation, and that they were well aware of that before the drugs were even on the market.
Yet Prozac is now being recommended very aggressively.
Because it's the only one that's still licensed.
$130,000 a second is paid for these drugs to destroy the souls of our children.
The topic for today's advisory committee meeting is the possibility of a causal linkage between the emergence and/or intensification of suicidal thoughts and acts, suicidality that is, and/or other violent behaviors, and the use of antidepressant drugs.
And only 3 days after being put on Prozac, I started having terrifying nightmares.
This drug is most assuredly responsible for any torment or suffering and the eventual suicide of my husband.
I grabbed my husband and I said, I feel like I'm dying. I felt like I was leaving my body.
By the 14th day, I was experiencing such intensified fear that I could not stand to face life as it was for me anymore.
I'd wake up screaming, and the nightmares always had something to do with death.
Where suicide had never been a logical solution for any reason for me.
I took the 9mm automatic, sat down on the bed, and put the gun to my head.
Because I tried to commit suicide in front of my 5 children.
My wife shot and killed both of these 2 boys right here.
Took a 12-inch butcher knife and stabbed himself violently in the abdomen once, and then proceeded to do it twice. Thank God I was a lousy shot. I was a victim. Lily, you answer me. You tell me what happened to me.
I do not find from the evidence today that there is credible evidence to support a conclusion that antidepressant drugs cause the emergence and/or the intensification of suicidality and/or other violent behaviors.
The committee of the FDA, almost everybody on the committee worked for the drug companies. So the conflicts of interest was so enormous that the FDA had to give them all letters forgiving them of their conflicts of interest so they couldn't be sued.
There are 2 rules that operate right now with federal advisory committees. Rule number 1 says that anyone who has a substantial conflict of interest cannot serve on a federal advisory committee. Rule number 2 says that rule number 1 can be waived. And rule number 1 is waived. In some cases, the evidence shows 50% of the time.
I have heard my pharmacist talking about that sometimes they push through those testing periods, and they should be longer, but they're shorter because there's such a need for that drug on the market that sometimes they just wait to see if something happens, and that's sometimes why there are drug recalls. And I mean, we get those too through our our wholesaler. They'll send us each day in our order things that'll say, this is now in back order, please take it off your shelf and send it back to us. And usually there is no reason. I would say that commercials do affect people, because I know a lot of the time people will call and say, do you have this drug? And I know there's just been a commercial for it, because a lot of the time patients will get a prescription and they'll just say, well, I'm taking it because my doctor said I should. I told him I felt this way and he decided I should take this.
You'll see people that, before a night out, they'll be taking an Adderall at 10 p.m. at night. They're not going to the library, they're taking an Adderall so that when they're drunk, they're able to keep going. And this creates a problem, because most people, when they start drinking and they get a bit tired, and eventually, they'll pass out at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Here, you're taking a drug that's going to turns you into a hyperactive, drunk. So you're able to be active and, be drunk at the same time. Another thing is the Ambien craze. People that take Ambien, which is prescribed for sleeping and insomnia, and they'll take it and purposely try to stay up on Ambien because of, they think that eventually they'll trip and hallucinate. And not only are the people that are prescribed doing it, they'll also give it to friends, or sell it to friends, or sell it to people they know to abuse as well.
Would you be surprised to find out that the majority of college students sell at least some of their prescription drugs?
No. I think it's kind of true when people say, I don't think there will ever be a cure for AIDS or for the flu or for things like that, because then people won't be able to make money off of it. Because if you eradicate it, then there will be no medicine to treat it, and then that person can't make any money off of it. And if our world continues to be a capitalist society where it's about who can make up the best business plan and make the most money, and we're still very monetarily focused, then I think we're going to continue having stronger drugs that are made that maybe shouldn't be, just for the sake of making the next strongest thing, just to say we did and to sell it to people to make more money. And so my only opinion, I guess, is that it should be more tightly regulated.